In this tutorial, we're going to deal with HTML forms and form elements. So to start off with this tutorial, I'm going to open our examples directory. Then I'm going to create a new directory, which I'm going to call forms. Now that I'm done with that, I'm going to open up Notepad++ for us to go through our coding in the examples. So here we are in Notepad++. So to do that, I'm going to create a new Notepad++ document. And I'm going to save it as into the forms directory. I'm going to call this file forms example1.html. I'm going to save it as HTML and click on save. Then we'll put our basic HTML tags. These are opening and closing HTML tag. These are head tag. This is a closing head tag. These are title tag. This is a closing title tag. Oops. Title. Okay. So let's give our document a title. So we are going to call this form example1, the title. And we're going to create the body tags. So this is the opening and closing body tags. Alright. So let's simply put a header on our web page and see what we can do to style it up. So I'm just gonna put a div, opening and closing div tag. Then I'm gonna align this div to the center, and within the div tags we'll have a font tags where we can format the text to be, let's use a blue, and then we'll have some h1 for the header of our text, and we'll say form example. So let's check it out on the web browser and see if we are on the right track. Okay, so I'm gonna go up to the directory, open the forms directory, and I'll run forms example1.html. Okay, so here comes our web browser and we have our form example. Okay, so now what is a form? That's the question we should be answering first. In HTML, a form, okay, is like, just like the name implies, is a form. Okay, I know that sounds funny, but that's what it is. So you can create forms in HTML which you can fill and submit. If you've been browsing the websites that gives forms, like you want to open a new Yahoo Mail or Facebook account, they provide you with a form. You want to purchase something online, they provide you with a form. So forms on web pages aren't new, we've seen them before. So this tutorial is basically to demonstrate how a form works and how it is being designed in HTML. Alright, so let's go back to our source code and see what we can do to create a form. So we're gonna create a form right over here. I'm gonna use the form tag. That's what we need to create a form. So when we do that, I'm gonna save. Then let's go back to the browser and check out I'm gonna refresh. You can see there's no difference. So the form tag is one of those few tags that doesn't make any difference. Okay, we still have our source code here showing the form tags. All right, so we had saved successfully, but the form tag doesn't make any difference. Now this tag denotes a form, but for a form to be a complete form, it needs form objects or elements. Okay, so we are ready to put in this web page a text field, submit button, checkbox, and all that. Those are the things that create a form. So let's say you want to create a site that requires people to log in. Okay, so we can say login form. So let's put this as the header, login form example. Okay, so I'm gonna create a login form in here. So to create a login form, I'm gonna create a text field which we use the input tag. The input tag is one of those tags that is single. Okay, so the input tag will give us a text field, but we have to specify an attribute to actually get a text field. So that's why I have to provide the type parameter. Okay, now when we say type is equals to text, that means this input tag is going to be a text field. All right, and let's go over to the browser and refresh and see what we've got. So you can see a text field now shows up here. All right, so this that tag is the one that created this text field, the input tag of type equals text. Okay, so the other parameters an input tag can have, the next, which is also one of the most important parameters an input tag should have, that's a text field, is the name parameter. Every text field should have a name so that it can be differentiated to other text from other text fields that may be on the form on the same web page. So this text field, we're gonna call it, let's say we want to use it for username, so we're gonna call it username. All right, so that's another parameter. Another parameter a text field can have is the value, which is the default value text that can be contained in the text field. Like for instance, you can type username as the default value. Let me use capital letter over there, but doesn't make any difference anyway. So we can put username as the default value. Then when we go over to the browser and refresh the page, you can see that username becomes the default value. Of course, it can be removed if we wish to type something else. We can type something on the text field and remove the default value. Okay, but most times the default value is not always necessary, and it's not compulsory to do that. Okay, the things that are actually mandatory or necessary is the type and the name of the text field. Okay, another kind of text field is the password field. So I'm gonna create another input text field of type. I'm gonna say password, then the name, and just call it password. Of course, you can give the name any name. Okay, you can give any name, it's gonna work, but this type must be of type password. Same as username, you can give it any name. So note that very well. So now I'm gonna close this tag and let's check it out on the web browser. And you can see I have a second text field here. This is the first text field, this is the second text field. Okay, this first text field is a normal text field, but the other text field is a password text field. All right, so you can see the difference. This shows up, whatever I'm typing shows up as bunches of dots. That's to ensure that someone looking behind my shoulder isn't going to be able to read my password, so it makes it more secure. All right, now if we look at this browser output over here, we'll notice that the text field align horizontally on each other. Okay, so that's not what we usually see, or sometimes maybe like Facebook, you have your username and your password on the same line, but some sites may prefer to put the password field next to the username field. On the other hand, text fields usually have labels. So what's the things we need to do to make the text fields have labels? So let's create labels on the text field. So label is just something we can use to identify, or the user can use to know what is supposed to be typed on the text field. Like over here, a label can say username to be a label for this text field, and I can say password to be a label for this other text field. So I'm gonna save it, go over to web browser, refresh, and you can see what I mean. So this is the label for the first text field, and this is the label for the second text field. Okay, so like as I was saying, I was supposed to make the other text field to be on the next line. So I'm gonna use the br tag, save it, go over to the web browser and refresh, and you can see these text fields are now aligned vertically on each other. Okay, so you can create as many text fields as you wish, but ensure that they are within this form tag. Okay, because they are form objects or form elements, if you may wish. So these are one of the basics of the forms. Now someone may be asking, I usually see in a login form two text field, username and password, and usually there's a button to submit the form. So let's create a submit button. So to create a submit button, just move it to the next line with the br tag. To create a submit button, we're simply going to use the input tag again, but this time the type of it is going to be equal to submit. Okay, you can give it a name, you can call it anything you want to call. Let's call this, you can still call it submit. Okay, and then the value, okay, let me just show you what's gonna show in if we don't put the value. Okay, so let's go back to the web browser, refresh the page, and you can see it says submit query. Alright, so that's typical of Firefox. In some other browser it may not show anything. Okay, so on the other hand, we can give it a value. If Firefox was given a default value saying submit query, but we can give it our own value by saying login, for instance. Anything can go in here, remember. Also with the name, you must note that the name and the value could be anything, but as for the type, it has to be submit. It must be a submit button. Go back to the browser, refresh, and you can see the value of this button now displays on the button. So the value of the button always displays on the button, so note that very well. Alright, so now that we've created two text fields, someone can type his username and text field, and someone can type his password and the text field, and someone can now click on the login button to submit. Firefox says, would you like to remember the password for Jefferson7Next on file? I'm gonna say not now. Okay, so now this doesn't really make any much difference than what we usually see, right? But the next thing I want you to learn is that a form tag doesn't just stay like this. Form tag also have very important attributes. Like a form could have a name. Okay, so you can call this login form, or you can call it anything you wish to call it. I'm just gonna call it login form. The next thing the form tag could have is the action. Now the action parameter of the form tag is usually a URL. Where are you gonna submit the form to? Which site, which web server, and so on. So this action part is extremely very important. Okay, so you can put a URL here. Let's say you want to log into yahoomail.com. Okay, you can put www.yahoomail.com. so the form will be submitted to yahoomail.com. Is it usually mail.yahoo.com? Mail.yahoo.com. That's usually what it is, but I'm not gonna submit it to mail.yahoo.com anyway. I'm just showing you the possible values of the action. Sometimes the action parameter value may be accompanied by what you usually see, which is HTTP, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Okay, another important attribute of the form tag is the method. Okay, what method is this form going to be submitted? Now there are two kinds of methods. We usually have a get, which is GET, or a post, POST. Okay, so the question is, what's the difference? If you use a get to submit a form, okay, my internet connection is down now, so this one won't be submitted anyway, but let me just refresh and submit and show you what I mean. So I type my username, okay, and then I type my password, and I click on login. Okay, now you can see that it tries to send my internet connection is down, so that's why you're seeing server not found. There's no problem at all, but what I'm trying to show you here is that it was attempting to connect to mail.yahoo.com, but look at this, a question mark follows. Oops, look, that didn't go well. Let's submit the form all over again so I can show you what I mean. Okay, mail.yahoo.com, a question mark follows, and you can see username equals Jefferson7x, which is what I type, and password equals QWERTY, and submit equals login. Now what the hell do these things mean? Okay, so these are the parameters that are being sent, okay, and their corresponding values. Let's go back to the form. In the form, the password I'm typing here is QWERTY, which are the very first 6 characters of the keyboard, 6 alphabetical characters of the keyboard, I mean to say. So let's just say that's my password. Okay, this is my username, and this login button. All of them, 3 of them, they all go to the URL we are submitting the form to. Again, I'm going to view page source to really just explain this. The form action is supposed to send us to mail.yahoo.com. Since we are using the get method, the values of this form elements, the username, the password, and the submit, are being sent unencrypted through the browser. So if I click on login, you see my username, which is equals to Jefferson7x. The ampersand here is to separate the parameters. So this username is a form parameter, or we can call it request parameter. We'll really talk about this much later when we're doing CGI. This is the password, another request parameter, which is the value. The ampersand again separates the request parameter. So this is another request parameter, which is the submit button, and its value is equal to login. Okay, this is it. Okay, again, let me show you the source file so you can see very well. The request parameter, username, password, the values are what we're going to type in this text field. Okay, remember this is the text field. So the value of this submit button, which is an input parameter, is login, and that was submitted as well. All these are shown just because we're using get. Now get is faster than post, but it is unsecured for forms like login forms, because as you can see, if we type our password here and click on login, a smart person can easily look toward behind your shoulder and see the password you were typing. And like I said, it's unencrypted, so it's unsecured. If there are some malicious programs out there in the internet who might sniff out your password, they might easily know your secrets. Okay, so in terms of security, get is not the way to go. So let's go back to Notepad++ and change this method to post. Okay, so that doesn't mean we shouldn't use get anyway. There are some certain situations you'll be needing a get request, and there are some certain situations that you can't do without a get request, which I'll show you later on. Also note that any link you click on in a web page, you're also sending a request, which is also using the get request. And finally, if you don't specify a method in your form will by default be using a get request. Okay, so note those things very well. Let's go back to the page, refresh our form, and type in our password and click on login. Now you can see shows mail.com, yahoo.com, but doesn't show those request parameters. That's because they are encrypted and they are more secure. So that's the difference between the get and the post methods in a form. So this tutorial looks like it's getting longer than I thought. I'm just gonna pause this particular recording, and then we're gonna continue from this example to see many other form elements and how to format a web page to look better than this when you are dealing with forms. So I hope you found this informative, and thanks for viewing.